So it's my pillars exercise, and I think it's a wonderful tool for all people. If women really started taking care of themselves, we could change the world.
We're here with Dr. Julie Vaughn, who is a holistic fertility expert. And I've seen Julie for acupuncture a few times now, and I thought it would be really beneficial to get her here and to kind of talk to us about some, like concerns, like things that are coming up, I feel like, within women who I know who are trying to get pregnant, maybe some misconceptions, and maybe just some things that, we can do to, help get the vibe right for, the little one who's floating around somewhere.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So when we first met, you kind of asked me about my pillars. And I thought that was a really beautiful kind of way of how I should be thinking about what I need. So I thought you could maybe talk to us about kind of how you describe pillars and how this is an exercise that you do for a lot of your clients.
Sure.
And how we can kind of give this exercise to our viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a fundamental practice for women, I've often said that if women really started taking care of themselves, we could change the world. It's always this legacy of the other and putting the other first, which is not a bad thing, but there's only so much time we have now, and we're all so overextended that how do we circle back around into gaining sovereignty for ourselves, this autonomy for ourselves. And it's pretty much impossible to do if you're exhausted or not eating the right food, or if you're having this internal battle with yourself, conversation about all the things that are wrong with your environment or your life. So how can you be proactive about that and also really daily have a way to keep yourself centered and sovereign? And so essentially in the legacy of in the tarot, there's a card called the High Priestess, and the High Priestess card is she's a bit removed from everyone, but she's not the queen. She has a spiritual element to her where she really is kind of taking care of the spiritual health of the community, of the world. And I feel like for women, either if they're mothers yet, or if they're in partnerships, or if they're just caring for themselves, that element of really finding what it is that keeps the foundation of your body connected to the roof of your being, how do you connect those two? The foundations of practical life and care, and then also as high up as possible, as low down as necessary, as high up as possible. So I thought that it's like having your pillars, like the pillars that hold the temple up. So that's essentially the exercise that I've created that I think is really wonderful for everybody. It's to figure out, you have to have at least 3. 4 is great, and there can be more, and they can change over time, but they're kind of like the rudimentary things that you need, like looking back at times in your life where you were happy, things were flowing, you were healthy in your body, you felt good. Like, what were those things that you were doing, and how can you prioritize those daily? So it's my pillars exercise, and I think it's a wonderful tool for all people, but also when going into motherhood, it's really important to have these things kind of practiced beforehand, because it's the biggest opportunity to start to lose yourself, to the demands of the other.
And so it's just kind of on you, once you establish your pillars, to really implement those pillars every week or every day or whatever. I guess, like, if I think about my pillars,
essentials,
like love,
good,
me time, like whether that's like working out or a bath, or just like sitting for an hour on my computer. Like, I just kind of like need an uninterrupted hour.
At least quantify it, so you have an hour, so it's like an hour a day. Yes.
An hour a day,
good,
uninterrupted.
Good.
Like proper nutrition is really
Eating
important
good.
to me.
Spot on eating.
Yeah. I mean, if I could extend that pillar to say, like, you know, if I was cooking my own food, that'd be amazing, but it's not always possible. But like, proper nutrition is really key. And then I guess I also kind of need like at least 2 nights in a week.
Yeah.
Like, you know, my husband and I are very social people.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of friends. I have a lot of friends. We have events, all that stuff. And, you know, I just feel like 2 nights a week, we got to be home. Whether we have people over here, great. But like 2 nights in for me is
it's great. So you have some rootedness, and in that you're also establishing your home energy, which is very powerful too for, you know, for all things, but especially for establishing a home.
Okay, cool. So now I just have to like stick to that.
Yeah. I mean, and there are things that make you feel good and that you love.
Yeah, of course. But I always like, you know, if I can get a bath in every 3 weeks, I'm happy. But I guess I should aim a little bit higher. Okay.
Prioritize it. And then what happens what's cool is when you really do these things, you find that it helps to open up time in a different way. So even if you feel like you didn't have time for it, you're just more functional, better version of what you're putting out there.
Totally.
So
amazing. Okay, so what's like another kind of exercise that you you think is a good one for women and kind of self-care?
Yeah. That's a good question, right? I mean, women in self-care, it can be, you know, self-care is a bit buzzy right now. People talk a lot about self-care, and one of my criticisms of that is sometimes it doesn't go deep enough. You know, even if you're doing holistic practices and holistic medicine, if you're integrating all kinds of, you know, alternative energies and things into your life, it still can become just another thing that you're doing. Right. It can become another kind of material thing. So I think it's essential to have, again, it's what I said about high up and low down, like a practice. When we left the systems of more antiquated religious structures and clanism and like being in very small knit communities where we had moral codes, one of the things that happened as we got to individualize from that, and as women gained more freedom, we also lost some of the good stuff that comes with that. This kind of like faith in the unseen, or a sense of there's other things at work, or there's a cosmic timing, or it's actually really interesting. And if you asked any woman in this, like women who grew up in the 50s and 60s, probably even into the 70s, how many children they were going to have, almost always the answer would be God knows. God knows, right?
Right.
You ask anybody now, any woman, and it's like, I'm going to do this one then, and I want this many.
Right.
I'm waiting till I'm this age.
Right.
And so the positive thing is that, like, hey, you have freedom now. We have economic freedom. We have multitudes of freedoms we didn't have before. But also that comes with it is this kind of responsibility, right? And this kind of everything being on your own shoulders. So how can you find the places to cultivate the magical, you know, what I call practical magic, and find a way.
One of my favorite movies, by the way.
It's so good, I know. And find like the tools that can really just help you get in more to this like deeper letting go, and maybe even if it doesn't have to be a system that you buy into 100%, you don't have to go and, you know, become a zealot.
Right.
But the tools of the esoteric and the spiritual can all be really, really helpful in getting out of this kind of critique, which totally engages your nervous system and your endocrine system. Right. It produces all kinds of stress hormones that do affect your hormonal body. So then it becomes kind of a treatment in itself, especially when you get into infertility and fertility work. It's kind of the other thing you can do to help de-stress the body.
It's interesting because I feel like I am finding myself, I do this, I I do it often, and I am conscious of it, but I'm not doing enough to combat it, which is like at night I get antsy about having to go to sleep, and then I like push through this like 11:30 window of getting tired, and then all of a sudden it's 1:30 in the morning, and I know that at 10 o'clock I should be taking like, you know, my little vitamin mixture that I like normally, like when I'm being really diligent and on my shit, that like I should take these vitamins that help me kind of slow the nervous system down, and then I am ready for bed at midnight. But for whatever reason, I know that I'm not taking the vitamins when I should be taking them, and I'm like giving into this like system that I know I shouldn't be.
It's quite addictive, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the addiction of what stress hormones and adrenaline does. It gives you a little bit of like a mental rush.
Yeah,
right?
and I
Especially
feel like
when you have a lot to do and you're creative.
Right. And I mean, and there is like, I do feel I am creative at night, but I also feel like that creativity is only lasting like 30 minutes out of like the full 2 hours that I'm going through this cycle.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's weird though, because sometimes I'm always like, oh, well, I'm so diligent about it, and I'm being so good and regimented, and then other days I'm like, oh, I don't like feel like it, but then I'm like, oh God, like it's so annoying.
Yeah.
And then
you should add that to your pillars.
I know.
Well.
And then the adrenals, I feel like have a lot, you know, I'm on planes all the time, and like I don't get the best sleep when I'm traveling, and I just wonder if I should be doing more for my adrenals or not. But like, how do you, but that I think is another problem, is that
you're probably not, but
I feel like I've been told.
It's an end game thing that you have to think of, you know, like it's a long life, and you know, how are you going to save energy to spend with your grandchildren if everything is being expended now, right? So, and it's also a really, really relevant question when you're talking about going into fertility and having children, because it's exhausting on a whole other level, right? Physically, mentally, energetically. So, how do you know, a long time ago, many years ago, when I was learning the base level of what I practice now, one of the really brilliant doctors I worked with said, you know, there's really 3 things you can do with stress. One, you can do things like acupuncture and yoga and meditation to really mitigate its effects. 2, you can avoid it altogether, which is pretty much impossible. We have to expose ourselves to stress. And the 3rd thing is you really start to change your perspective of what it is as it comes in. So it requires some discipline in those moments when you don't, what Pema Chodron calls take the hook, where you don't necessarily, when you give yourself a moment before going down that spiral of not doing the things. And that discipline is, you know, I mean, it's one of the more difficult ways to show yourself love, but it's also a really important way that you show yourself love. These are parenting skills, really.
Yeah.
A lot of difficult decisions to make in those moments, to just kind of rise up and do the thing that you know is better for your spirit overall.
Right.
And then, you know, sometimes it's also about making some harder choices, you know, that are more for the end game.
Right.
As opposed to
right now. Okay.
And that goes back to the pillars. Like when you really practice those pillars, you get a lot more clarity.
Yeah.
And are able to identify more quickly where to leave things out or what doesn't feel right energetically.
Okay.